All right, welcome everyone to the program orientation for the new demonstration grants for Indian children accessing choices in education, or the ACE program. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today for this important orientation for your new grant, and congratulations on those new grant awards. So as we start today, we're going to just give a little bit more information about the ACE program and your fellow grantees. We are going to talk a bit about the grant conditions, and then also touch on performance reporting and budget revisions. Just a little housekeeping as we start, because there are many of us on today, we do have everyone muted, but we do encourage all of you to use the chat box. If you're looking for it, look at the bottom of your screen, and you should see two little chat bubbles. If you click on those, then you will be able to open up the chat box and you can pop in any questions that you might have right there. We'll take questions as we go throughout, and then we also have a dedicated time at the end of the meeting for questions as well. I know many of you may have received multiple OIE grants in this grant season, which is wonderful, but you may have attended some orientations last week, as well as you may have been on the large group orientation on Thursday. This is not going to be a repeat of that same information. This is very specific to your ACE grant. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Donna Savas-Burns to kick us off.
Great. Thank you. Sarah, next slide, please. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, congratulations on your grant. And here, as Sarah said, we will be taking it into a little bit deeper. You may see a couple of the same slides just for some of those who may not have attended last week. As a reminder, for example, this one, the organized org chart, which shows the layout of the Office of Indian Education. We have our new director of the office, Mr. Julian Guerrero Jr., and he will be saying a few words in just a few moments. And then we have our formula, which many of you are familiar with in that team. And then we have this discretionary grant, which is what you're under. I'm the group leader, and with me, we have Angela Hernandez Marshall, who among many hats is the program officer for the professional development grants, as well as the interim null and step. She does some steps. She does a little bit of everything. And then we have Shala Ortega, who does our tribal education partnership program. She's out on leave, but she should be coming back in the next couple of weeks. And then we have your main new, well, she's not new, but for you, Bianca Williams, the demonstration program officer. And she's here, who also will be presenting with us today. We do have a couple of empty spots, as we talked about last week, that we are anxiously trying to fill and to grow our office to serve you better. But as in a nutshell, that is our org chart. Next slide, please. And as I said, you have your program officer, Bianca Williams, and I am also the program officer for the NYCP. So you'll see our names because we all are kind of doing lots of different things and many hats and helping each other. So you'll see us overlap in our positions a lot, but Bianca will be the ACE program officer, and I am doing NYCP with a little bit to help Bianca as well. So you'll see both of us on many different notices, I imagine. Next slide, please. And with us, we have our Synergy Enterprises team, who is our OIE technical assistance team. They will be the ones you will hear a lot from with emails and logistics and planning. We are very, very happy to have them on board. You'll see several of them on this call and see their names. And we are very thankful. They were just awarded the new technical assistance contract just a few weeks ago. And so we're very, very happy to have them with us. Next slide, please. Here we have our famous OIE director, Mr. Julian Guerrero Jr., and he would like to say a few words to get this meeting started. Julian?
Thank you, Donna. I don't know about famous, but I'll try to do my best here. Good afternoon, good morning, folks. It's a pleasure to join you in my native tongue, Ha Marawek Naniat Yani Suara. My name is Julian Guerrero Jr. I'm the newly selected director for the Office of Indian Education. And first and foremost, I just want to say it is an absolute pleasure to join you here virtually. Also, what an incredible time for you to be a grantee. So for those who I haven't met, hello. For those who I have met before, hello again, dear friend. And for the grantees, you guys are about to embark on an incredible journey to put forth and implement your projects in your respective areas. And me being here is just to signal support, but also signal immense pride that I have in the OIE team for what they do. So Dr. Savis Burns and Angela and Bianca and Shala are a small but very mighty team, and they do their best and they work day in and day out to support you and your success. So I wanted to walk through just simply, grounding ourselves in the vision, not only my vision, but the needs for our Native communities or Indigenous peoples throughout all of the United States. And 2 points of my 10-point vision plan. Your projects can help us accomplish this year's FY 2021 vision. And 2 points in particular that I want to draw attention to is this idea of continuous improvement planning. And we want to use constituency input from you to drive the delivery of services to our grantees. Again, our commitment to building trust, building relationships, understanding the challenges that you're facing, especially now during coronavirus. And then the 7th one is to increase OIE visibility. For those advocates in the room, and you know who you are, you've been pushing for Indian Ed to be at the forefront of all issues concerning equity, concerning representation, and your projects can help fulfill visibility not just for the OIE, but for Indian education as a whole. And we want to together elevate the profile of Indian education for expanded community engagement. Next slide, please. So a few things to consider. The first, I always love to use quotes as an inspirational philosophy here. So if you could just follow me on the first quote. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. That attribution goes to Winston Churchill. And I want us to remember and be grounded in this philosophy that we make a living and we make a life, especially by what we give. And what each of your projects have the potential to do to impact the lives of Native children, to give them choice, to give them empowerment. That's the purpose. That is what we're committed to helping you complete and serve your communities. So Demo ACE in particular is about empowering choice for Native families and to choose desired educational services. Your projects represent a long-lasting promise to our Indian kids and children, students, that they deserve high-quality education options despite the disparate impacts of COVID-19. Next slide, please. Further, a few things I'd like you to consider is, as applicable, please take full advantage of your planning years, or not years, but planning year, 1 year, and engage with your partners and staff on the mission. Tackle your grant conditions now as soon as possible. Get those done, especially focusing on agreements and proof of partnership paperwork. If you're like me, as a former project director, it looms over you. Just get it done. Get it done now and get it out of the way. Plan for technical delays, because they will happen. I've been there. I've sat in the same chairs that you're sitting in, had the same stress that you had as a grantee, as a PD, or even had staff trying to implement, and let alone trying to implement during COVID-19. But keep in mind the focus on your educational services and your GIPRA measures. Our staff, our TA contractor, Synergy, and our other Office of General Counsel, we're here to help support you with information so that you can make better decisions and greater impacts for our Indigenous kids. And I'm very excited for what we can do together. So again, welcome to the OIE family and good luck.
Thank you so much, Julian. I always hate to follow him. He's so inspirational. Well, here we go. Here is the Demonstration Grants for Indian Children program. Next slide, please. And some of you who may not have joined us for the other, who are joining us for the first time here, just to start off on the same page, an overview of the discretion or the demonstration grant program. And the purpose is to support the projects to develop, test, and demonstrate the effectiveness of services and programs to improve the education opportunities and the achievement for Indian education for children and youth. And this year, as you know, we have a new absolute priority accessing choices in education, otherwise known as the Demo ACE program. And the applicants must propose a project to expand educational choice by enabling a tribe or the grantee and its tribal partner to select a project focus that meets the needs of their students and enabling parents of Indian students or the students to choose education services by selecting the specific service and provider desired. So it's all about choice with this program. Next slide, please. And as you can see here, we have 81 NYCP grantees who are continuing. And those are the ones many of you are familiar with those programs, and many of you have some of those existing programs ongoing. There are 81 of you. There are 40 additional new awards for the ACE grants, 40 additional new ones for the ACE grants, totaling $24.1 million. Now, for looking ahead for the continuation awards, those of course will continue into the next fiscal year, but at this point, there are no plans for any new competitions, any rulemaking, or any tribal consultations, just as we're looking forward to this brand new fiscal year. Next slide, please. And now getting to know your fellow grantees. Next slide. Here we are. Here are the 40 grantees who have been awarded. We are very happy to have you on board. We look through all of these applications, of course, and just phenomenal projects. And it's so exciting to see the creativity that went behind and the thought that went behind these programs. And I am very happy to see that. I know there'll be some great things to come out of these programs. So congratulations to all of you here. Next slide, please. And as you can see, this is awesome. Look how well distributed we are across the country. A lot of Alaska grantees, and we are well around all the United States. So that's very, very encouraging. Next slide, please. Okay, now I will turn it over to Bianca talking about the fundamentals of the program. Bianca?
Welcome, ACE team. Congratulations again on your award. We know that the application was not easy at all, so congrats. Since we know that there was a lot of complexity in the application, we wanted to make sure we dive back into the absolute priority and make sure that, you're molding your programs to make sure the program requirements are met. Next slide. So there are 20 applicants that received ACE that have a previous NYCP grant from 2015 cohort to the 2018 cohort. So that's half of the awards that have previous NYCP. So for those grantees who have NYCP, please shake NYCP out of your head when you are managing ACE, because ACE and NYCP is completely different. We need to make sure that we are following the absolute priority, which allows choice for students. So this means having multiple services and multiple service providers. Previously with NYCP, the grantee could be the only service provider providing the direct services to students. Under ACE, you will need to work with service providers to provide an option, so there can be a selection made by the families for those students that you are serving. Under the previous NYCP, projects were only up to 4 years. With ACE, we allow a planning period for up to 1 year, and the total project term is for 5 years in total. So there are only 3 grantees that did not propose a planning period And there are other grantees who propose planning periods for less than a year. Please know that there are requirements that we'll be going over that's due right after the end of your planning period before you can start delivering services. So we did not look in your application for those requirements. We will be looking for them at the end of your planning period. And, this is really just to provide different options and services to students is, part of the main priority. Next slide. So these are the program requirements of ACE. These are completely different again from NYCP. So with ACE, the focus needs to be specific services that are based on the needs in local community and include additional service providers. I guess I can keep reading. These are really important. You will also need to include more than one education option from which parents and students can choose from. Provide a method to enable parents and students to select services. Include a parent involvement and feedback process. Include a written agreement between the grantee and each service provider under the project. And include a fair and documented process to choose students in the event that the number of requests are more than this amount of funds that you can provide. You will also need to ensure that 80% of the grant funds are used to direct services to enable students, and no more than 15% of the grant funds is used on the service selection method. This does not apply during the planning period. Next slide. So these are all the options that you can choose from, the educational options. I'm pretty sure that you guys have narrowed down your choice already since we're past the application phase, but there still might be service providers that you may expand with and work with if you're going through a planning period right now. So you must make sure that all the service providers are providing are meeting one of these options. Next slide. So again, one of the program requirements is making sure that the services you are providing is based on the community's needs. This should be evidence-based. Definitely should have high quality service providers and high quality services provided. And then the services should be related to the project's focus. And you are also required to have parent feedback. Parents can advocate and ask for additional services if it meets the project's focus. Next slide. So a really big component of ACE is making sure you have a service selection method. Again, a service selection method can be as simple as a piece of paper where families can select options to an advanced app where families can download the services or the options for the services. It's up to you, your service selection method. And, it has to be a part of your program. So this is one of the things that if you are in a planning period right now that we would be looking for to make sure you have this method completed. Again, very important, there has to be more than one service provider, and the grantee can provide a service, but there will have to be, more than one service provider. So you cannot be the only service provider. Next slide. So exactly what I was saying, you will need to make sure that you have contracts with service providers. This is everything that needs to be included in the contract. Please make sure, you have completed contracts at the end of the planning period if you are in your planning period. Next slide. So this is more information for contracts. make sure that the procurement transactions made with grant funds are full and open, consistent with the standards in the uniform guidance. And in improving your application, Ed has not approved any specific entities or individuals you may have identified in your application as an evaluator, service provider, or other political contractor. You must select all contractors in accordance with the requirement above. Next slide. Here's some more information. The slides will be sent out or provided shortly after this presentation. Next slide. So you will also need to have a parent involvement and feedback process. This is a requirement. We got to make sure that the parents are involved in the options available. We will have some more webinars in the future to kind of help with getting some information from parents. We don't want to make this a data burden grant, but we do have some very specific GIPR measures that we are looking for that will provide some resources with in the future to help, get this information from parents. But you need to make sure that you are replying back to parents within 30 days. And because a parent makes a request does not technically mean you have to provide the service, but you do have to consider it and provide them with feedback and information why you cannot provide the service. But yeah, we'll definitely dive deeper into this requirement in the future as well. Next slide. Student selection process. So I'm pretty sure the majority of the applications have choices that they're providing for students and families. If there's any time that, you didn't submit an application that covers the amount of students that want those services, there needs to be a fair and documented process to choose the students to be served. So just make sure that that process is documented and followed whenever the amount of students exceed the funds you have available. Next slide. So again, the last 4 items that I just covered, if you are in a planning period, we will be looking for those items. The list is right here. After your planning period, again, there are 3 grantees that did not plan for a planning period. So we should already have this information and they should already be able to move forward. Next slide. And I believe this is going to Donna, right?
No, I think this is where we go over to Jill.
Oh, Joe, I'm sorry.
Okay, hi everybody. This is Jill Martin, and I'm one of the attorneys in the Office of General Counsel who help advise Office of Indian Ed, and in particular, this demonstration grants program. And my colleague, Colin Bishop, and I are going to just run through a few things related to your GAN and a few of the conditions you may have received to make sure that you're aware of these things and that you can comply in a timely manner because they're really crucial. So this is just a picture of what we call the GAN, the Grant Award Notification, what the GAN looks like. We often get questions, the program offices get questions about the details of the GAN, and it's really important to get familiar with that document, look at it, If you do have any questions about what something means, contact Bianca, ask her questions as a follow-up. Some of the questions we sometimes get on this, basic blocks here on the GAN are, what's the difference between the budget period and the performance period? The budget period is this 12-month period, your first year, basically, of your grant award, whereas the performance period is the entire amount that it could be funded for. It's not a guarantee of funding because you do have to show annual progress, right, towards meeting your objectives. So there's always the possibility that you would not get a continuation award if you are not making progress. But basically, the whole performance period is the total amount of time that you can get funded under this particular grant. Okay, next slide. And here's block 10, terms and conditions, very important because it's going to give you specific conditions for your particular grant. It'll also list your indirect cost type would be regular for this program because it's not a restricted program, and the rate if you have an existing rate and it's not expired. Okay, next slide. So some of the conditions that you may have. Everyone has condition 1 and 2. So this applies to everybody. Condition 1 is about this absolute priority, the ACE priority. And that is, as Bianca explained, about enabling the parents and students to choose services and enabling them to select specific service and provider. And that is something that she explained and that I'm sure you'll be getting more into as you get into your planning period. Any questions about what you need to do? Again, you would contact Bianca. The condition 2 is about submitting a revised budget. And we are going to talk about that a little later in the presentation. But basically, this particular absolute priority has some complicated features relating to your budget. As Bianca mentioned, 80% of the funds have to go to direct services. And that does not apply, however, in your planning period when you're not providing direct services yet. So we're going to be talking more about that in a little bit. Okay, next slide. Another grant condition. Condition 3 is everyone that has a planning period. So this is almost everyone. As Bianca mentioned, there's only a few grantees that don't have a planning period and are implementing immediately. So she mentioned already the 4 things that have to be provided before the end of the planning period. Not all of you have an entire year. Some of you have a few months. Some of you have 6 or 9 months. And that's all tailored, of course, to your individual project. So before that period is over, you have to submit to the program office description of that service selection method and how it's going to make sure that your grant funds are transferred directly from you to the provider. In other words, no funds may ever go to a parent, right? That's very important. And the service selection method, as Bianca mentioned, can be a number of different type of methodologies, whether it's online or a walk-in center or many different options. The parent involvement and feedback process could also be an online system. It could also be a paper-based system, but some way for these families to request, maybe they don't like the provider for the particular service and they would like to suggest another one. Maybe they would like a whole different service they would like to request, and you have to have that availability. This parent involvement system can include your parent liaison, and that can be a salary that's included in your budget. And that person could do the outreach with the families and make sure that everything's going smoothly with them. Okay, next slide. And the other 2 things that are also part of this deliverables that have to be submitted at the end of, before the end of the planning period, the written agreement, this just needs to be a sample. So we have had this question already, whether you have to submit every contract with every provider, and the answer is no. You need to give OIE a sample of what your agreement will look like. And it's important to note, OIE does not have a required form. There is not a required OMB approved form for you to use. So you can make up your own contract as long as it includes those provisions that are laid out that you have to include. And all those provisions are written out in the notice inviting applications. So they're very clear. They're also in the regulations, because we do have regulations for this program that applies to the ACE. And Bianca can always give you a copy of those provisions that need to be in the contract. So you're going to send in a sample of the agreement and then a list of the providers with whom you have agreements. So by the end of that planning period, you've got your sample agreement, you've got your list of everyone who you've signed an agreement with. And that way OIE knows you are ready to roll. You've got everything in place. You've got that parent feedback system. You've got your service selection system. And on day one of when your planning period's over, you're going to be providing those services. Okay. And number 4 is that plan that Bianca mentioned for selecting students in the event that the demand exceeds capacity. You might have come up with a lottery system or something else that you may already have a transparent criteria you're going to use. All right, next slide. Another grant condition. Number 4 is only for those very few grantees that are implementing services immediately. You have to submit those 4 same items right away, okay? If you didn't submit them in your application. So you have a few weeks to get those in. All right, next slide. Grant condition 5. Here is some, oh,
I think this
I'm
one's
gonna
mine.
turn it over to Colin. Grant condition 5, go ahead, Colin.
Thanks, Jill. I'm Colin Bishop. I'm also one of the program attorneys that supports OIE and this demonstration grant program in particular. And if you were on the last webinar, you heard from me and I think all of the presenters last week already. So continuing with the grant conditions, grant condition number 5, you can see we have A, B, C, D, and E. I don't think there's anybody who has all 5 of those, A, B, C, D, and E. You might have one, you might have a few, but they're all under grant condition 5. And the ones that are actually on your GAN are the ones that apply to you. So these are grant conditions that are to sort of fix a small problem from your application. All of these things, a plan for tribal involvement, a plan for family involvement, a plan for ensuring that evidence for ensuring that the evidence showing the project is evidence-based, plan for continuing activities after the grant period, a plan for overseeing service providers. All of those things were meant to be included in the application. If they were omitted accidentally, or the reviewers didn't see them for some reason, that's why you would get grant condition 5, saying, which basically means we couldn't find this in your application, it was a requirement, so now you have until November 16th to fix that and send in to OIE whatever is listed in your is listed on your GAN as having been missed from the application. That's grant condition 5. Next slide, please. Grant condition 6, again, is something that was meant to be included in the application, but if for some reason it was omitted or we didn't find it, that's what grant condition 6 is all about. This is only applicable to a grantee who should have had a partnership with a specific tribe. And the reason would be that you are, the grantee is not a tribe itself, and that that grantee's project is it appears anyway, to be serving students where 50% of the student population to be served is members of one tribe. And you might remember that under the NIA and the regulations, that if you were a grantee who is not, or sorry, an applicant who is not a tribe, and you proposed a project that would be serving a student population where 50% of those students were members of a single tribe, that tribe needed to partner with you for the application. So this is just grant condition 6, again, applies only to those applicants where you're not a tribe and your project appears to be serving a student population that is 50% or more members of a single tribe, and we didn't see any proof of a partnership with that tribe. What you need to submit, if you have this condition on your grant, what you need to submit by November 16th is either documentation showing that you do have a partnership with the appropriate tribe, or a statement explaining why this requirement doesn't apply to your application. And really the reason why it might not apply is that you don't really have 50% or more students who are from a single tribe. So because that's the hook that makes this requirement apply to certain projects. So if you do have 50% or more students from a single tribe, you need to partner with that tribe. If you don't, and you have this grant condition, you need to send in a statement to OIE saying, this grant condition actually doesn't apply to my grant because I'm not planning to serve a student population that is 50% or more members of a single tribe. Next slide, please. Grant condition number 8. Grant condition number 8 is very important because this one is really related to your eligibility to even have applied for this grant. And so there are sort of two things here. First, grant condition number 8 is a requirement that you submit documentation to OIE showing that an Indian organization meets the definition in our regulations of an Indian organization. That's in our regulations. It was in the NIA. And if you have grant condition number 8 on your GAN, it will also cite the exact definition of what an Indian organization is and all the specific pieces that we need evidence showing that you meet the definition. You could have grant condition number 8 on your GAN for one of 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is that you, the applicant, applied as an Indian organization, but left out or omitted some part of the evidence that we needed to show that you are in fact an Indian organization under our definition. Reason number 2, you could have this on your application. Reason number 2, you could have this on your GAN is if one of your partners is an Indian organization and we didn't receive all of the information that we needed to show that that required partner meets the definition of an Indian organization. So for example, you might be a school district, an LEA, that was required to submit an application with a tribe or an Indian organization as a partner. You selected an Indian organization, you turned in your application. The grantee is the school district. And if that grantee, the school district, has condition number 8 on here, it's not about you, the school district, showing that you're an Indian organization. It's about your partner, that Indian organization that is the required partner, submitting all of the evidence showing that that required partner really is an Indian organization. I think there are a very small number of grants that this condition was added to. And if you have questions or need more specific information about exactly what evidence was missing or something like that, that is when you would want to contact your program officer, Bianca, and she could give you more information. Next slide, please. This next slide is about a couple of different grant conditions that don't have numbers. They just have the if you have them on your GAN, you'll just see the description, either indirect cost rate or missing audit. Indirect cost rate is about your indirect cost rate. This is probably on your grant. If you have this on your grant, it will be there as not condition number 4, it will be titled attachment number 4. And that's just an attachment explaining some of the requirements about your indirect cost rate and any updates to your indirect cost rate that might be needed. Quick note, and we will talk about this more later on in this presentation, and I know it will be a big topic in a future presentation about budget. But it's really important to note that even though you as the grantee might have an indirect cost rate that is more than 20%, maybe 25, 28, 29%, that indirect, you're not going to be able to use your full indirect cost rate for this grant, because there is a separate specific cap of 20%, 20% for ACE project costs when the project is actually up and running. That doesn't apply during a planning period. During your planning period, there's not that same limitation, so you're able to use your full indirect cost rate during your planning period. But if you are an entity that has an indirect cost rate that's higher than 20%, that's just something you're going to want to keep in mind. And again, we'll talk about that both later today and in a future presentation. The other fiscal grant condition is if you are missing your single audit. Just so that you know, the way that this grant condition is added is if your entity is flagged in one of our tracking systems as having missed a single audit during a past fiscal year. It's possible that flag is not always correct because it doesn't always recognize the entities that weren't required to complete an audit because their spending was less than $750,000. So again, if you are an entity that has spent $750,000 or more in federal funds during a fiscal year, you should be submitting you're subject to the audit requirement every year. If you have this grant condition and maybe it says you didn't turn in an audit for FY15, if you spent $750,000 or more, you should have done that audit, and you'll need to get that to us by December 30th. If you are actually under the $750,000 threshold for that year, you'll want to submit information to OIE explaining that you actually didn't meet that threshold. And just a quick note, I'm pretty sure that I said spent, as in an entity that spent $750,000 or more in funds. It's not spent, it's received. So if you've received $750,000 or more in federal funds, that's when the audit requirement attaches to you. So just trying to be a little bit more precise with the language there. Next slide, please. So related to indirect cost rates, if you have questions about indirect cost rates, there are a lot of resources to help you. Some of those resources are on this slide right here. There's some great resources and explanations from the Department of Labor. That's the second one on this list. And then in addition, the Department of Education, we have our own resources about cost allocations and indirect costs generally. Next slide, please. I think this is the last condition that I'm going to talk about, which is if you are an entity that has multiple awards going at the same time. So maybe you are an entity that got an ACE grant this fiscal year, and you also have an NYCP grant from last year, several years ago, something like that. Maybe you're an entity that received an ACE grant, and you also received a grant under the Native American Language Program. Or maybe you are, I guess you might also be an entity that received 2 ACE grants this year because you submitted 2 applications for totally different projects. All of that, if you have this grant condition on your grant, which is about having multiple discretionary grants at the same time, you have to submit a coordination plan to OIE by April 30th. And that would be a plan that shows how you're going to keep your funds separate so that you're not using funds from this grant program to do things under that other grant program. It should also mention coordination and include a specific timeline or similar for any coordinated activities under this ACE grant and other grants. And that's it for conditions. If you have questions, I hope you've been putting them in the chat box. I haven't been looking, but some of the other folks have been. And we will address those either at the end of the presentation or following up later. Next slide.
Hey, Donna, I think we do have a couple of questions that we can address now if we can just kind of get to them in the chat box briefly before we move on. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. The first thing I do want to point out is that, you know, we had the conditions numbered, but the numbering was kind of automatic to make the GAN. So if you didn't receive, let's say like condition 5 that we entered and you received condition 6, that may be 5 now. So the numbering may be off, but to say the least, read the GAN thoroughly. There's a lot of information in there. It kind of, you know, looks like black and white, but there's a lot of details that we need to cover to make sure that, you know, if there's any missing items that we need, it will be included on that GAN. So please read it through. Maybe the numbering is incorrect. If, you know, you didn't receive every single condition because it was automated afterwards. So yeah, they may not align. Also, there's a question about, do you need to have multiple service providers for each service? And no, you need to have multiple services and multiple service providers. So you cannot be the only service provider and you cannot only provide one service. So, you know, please make sure you're having an option. And that doesn't mean you have to have an option for every service you're providing. You know, if you're just providing math, you can have, you know, one contract to provide math tutoring or an online math service, and then you can have another service that helps with language. And maybe you're providing that language service, maybe it's in your own tribal language, but you need to make sure that there is an option or choice for each age group as well too. So if you're serving 3rd graders, they will need to be able to select options as well. You can't just say you're having, you know, reading for 3rd graders and 4th graders math and 5th graders science. You know, each grade that you're serving will need to have multiple services and multiple service providers. And an agreement is the same as a contract. So yes, you do need to have some legal documentation for each service provider to make sure that you're still responsible on meeting your project's goals. So you have to make sure that that agreement or contract will help you receive those results from them for those goals as well. You know, one thing that we thought of was that if, you know, students drop out of the service, or if, you know, they don't use all of the funds that you paid the service provider, you got to really think how you're going to handle that with the service provider. If there's like a refund or, a way you guys can make sure that you're distributing the correct amount of funds per student. Also, you are able to select different services and service providers throughout the duration of the grant, but you have to make sure that you're submitting a budget revision to show, if it's a big change, maybe there is no budget that's changing, but we definitely should be aware, if it's a complete different service provider, that there should be an agreement in place. But all of the services and service providers that you select must still help meet those program goals and the scope that you entered into your application. So, if your whole application says you're providing tutoring services, you can't select a service provider that's going to do like internships, because internships and tutoring is completely different and that wasn't included in your application. But maybe you've found like Sullivan or another online entity to help with the tutoring. You definitely can select different service providers, but just make sure that those revisions and changes still meet the scope of your project. And we do know that we're asking a lot from all of the grantees, and we are very aware of that. So we're definitely going to be working on providing some samples and resources for things like the contract agreement. We do not have a specific form for you to use, but I know it's sometimes useful just to see something that we're looking for. So I'll work with my team here and creating some samples for the contracts, as well as some collection information from the parents, and just different useful resources to help meet these program requirements, GIPR measures, and parent feedback that's required. Is there any other questions I'm missing?
I just have
Yeah,
a couple. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So there was one question about for the coordination plan, is it April 30th or November 30th? It is what it says on the PowerPoint. If I misspoke and said April instead of November, I apologize. Time has gotten a little bit weird during COVID-19. There was another question about, are conditions the same as an attachment? Basically, yes. They're just sort of different descriptive names. Some of them have deadlines and some don't. So an attachment might be just sort of an attachment about like rules for if you're planning a conference or something like that. But they're both equally required and important. There was another question about the due date for overseeing a service provider, for a plan for how to oversee a service provider, but that question was being asked by a grantee that has a planning period. If you have a planning period, then your plan for overseeing service providers is one of the things that is, well, let me not misspeak. We'll come back to that one.
There was also a question about whether there was a budget variance allowance for line items or the annual budget.
So we'll actually have a budget webinar next week where we'll go into detail. There is not a specific amount that requires a budget revision, although there are certain line items, like if you change anything from personnel, fringe, contractual, and of course, indirect cost rate, you need approval from the department. So you do have some flexibilities on budget revisions, but just be mindful as well. other requirements, like if you are adding a new service provider, we will need a service agreement with that provider. So, you know, there's still some things that you may change in your budget that may require department approval or more information.
Great. There was also a question about where they find these various conditions that might apply to them. So I can go back to that slide as far as it being there in block 10 on their letter. If people are trying, if you're looking at your GAN right now and trying to locate where that is, it should be in that block 10. And there was also a question about sending a copy of the PowerPoint, which we will be sending out after the event today. And then the last question that came in was asking about admin costs versus direct services. And I know you're going to be talking about that momentarily, so I can hold that one until after you talk about that.
Okay, and I have an answer. This is Jill, to one of the questions that came in about having a condition for overseeing service providers, even though you might be in a planning period. That is one of the requirements that applies to everyone in everyone's application. And it is not one of the things that you will work on during your planning period, like the service selection method and, you know, the parent feedback process. This is something that's required of everyone immediately in their application. And if you look back at that slide that we talked about for grant condition 5, I think it was like around slide 33.
34.
Okay, 34. If we can switch quickly back to that, you'll see that's one of the things that Colin explained. You might have one of these 5 things on your grant condition, but not all of them, because you may have missed one of them. And that last one, you'll see number E is the plan for overseeing service providers. So if you have that condition, you must get it in immediately. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jill. I'm going to go ahead and move us over to reporting requirements because we do have 2 questions in the chat box, but they're both about budget. So I'm going to hold those until we're in the budget section.
Great. And I believe that's me. So, okay, heading into reporting requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, we're talking about the annual performance report. Half of you are very familiar with this as being current NYCP grants, but we do require an annual performance report, typically due in the spring, and we will be giving you plenty of notice. Usually those notices will come in a mass email through their G5 account. Excuse me. And the performance report provides the most current performance and expenditure information based on your program goals and objectives. It has a standard components to which we will be explaining and providing assistance, technical assistance, the closer it becomes due. But there is a required cover sheet that must be signed by the authorized representative, along with an executive summary, kind of giving a snapshot of how your year went. You have your performance measures, and this is where the GEPRA and project objective data will go. And then your budget, we want to know what you've spent, what you've drawn down, and are you current as to your plan to avoid large carryovers. And then my personal favorite, section C, the additional information. You can provide pictures. We love going through, I personally love going through the pictures and samples of the work that you're doing. It's great to see something else besides words on a report. So feel free to share that too when you share your report. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Your GEPRA measures. And we are going to be talking more about GEPRA measures with technical assistance webinars in the future because they are quite complex. As I mentioned, you need to report your GEPRA measures every year, and you will be the one to determine how you will actually assess these measures. And keep in mind that, you know, your baseline data, what you have now, and then it will be a year behind as you report throughout your year. Next slide, please. And here's a nice graphic. Normally, we don't have this many GEPRA measures for our current grantees or former grantees. You'll see there are quite a number of them. There are 8. And this is a nice graphic that shows what they are. We do encourage you to look at the notice inviting applications and look at exactly what these requirements mean, because you are expected to report to each and every one of these measures, and understand that the quality of data, it's very, very important. We use this data to help us go to Congress and say, hey, look at this great work we're doing. This is why we need funding. So the quality of your GEPRA measures are very, very important. And again, we will have some technical assistance on those in upcoming future webinars. Next slide, please. And your project objectives follow a similar format as your GEPRA. You have to report on your personal project objectives as you listed in your application. You will determine again how you will collect these data and how you will be assessing your objectives being met. In the same format for collecting that data on your baseline, and then going a year by year format when you report. It's important to note that you should have a reporting process in place from day one, because it's very, very difficult to go back and try to recollect or to start collecting as you've already started your program. And so it's very, very important to have systems in place for this data collection, and that you are able to provide quality data for us and be able to track them appropriately and correctly. Next slide, please. We will be having our annual project directors meeting in the spring, and it will be a virtual event and a date to be determined. We will, of course, let you know. We're hoping, keep fingers crossed, in future years, we will be having these face-to-face. You are required to set aside some of the funding for this in your budget. And it takes the train the trainer approach, where you send one person and they will be responsible for bringing back the information for day-to-day management of your grant. And that is why you're encouraged to attend. The project director is the person who runs this, and that's who we would say would be the best attendee. And again, we see the NIA section 3, number 4, that was required in your budget. So that's probably already set aside, but for this coming spring, it will be a virtual event. Next slide, please. As mentioned throughout our meeting so far, technical assistance is very much needed. This is a complicated program, and we are here to support you. We are here to help you through all these different sections, whether it's from GEPRA, whether it's budget, whether it's anything we need, and we have our Synergy team here to help us. We will be doing needs assessment, and to base how our technical assistance events will go based on the needs of you guys. You, just to make a note in your email, I know we've seen a couple of people say they're not getting the information. Please add OIE at SEIS services.com to your email so it doesn't go to spam, because they are the ones who are most likely be communicating with you. We ask that when you do contact your program officer, always include your grant program in the subject line, as well as your name in the email. And we have some people, finance people, we have some project directors, we have project coordinators, we have authorized representatives, several different people. So please be consistent with your reporting, and you're giving us your PR number and your name and email in the signature line. All mails will come from that address at SEI Services, or it could be at AIR.org. So please add those to your email. Next slide, please. And now Bianca will be back to discuss some of these budget revisions. Bianca?
Thank you. So again, everyone must submit a budget revision. This was a grant requirement for all awardees. to make sure that, you know, the ACE constructional cost and the 80%, we're looking to make sure all of those requirements are followed. Also, if you notice a budget reduction in your GAN, there could have been numerous reasons for the reduction. There's unallowable costs, maybe indirect cost rate revisions are needed, but you would have received attachment 7, and you'll definitely need to make sure a budget revision is submitted to make changes to fit the new budget that was provided. Next slide. So again, we will have a very thorough presentation on the budget. We know this is very complex and confusing, so we're going to have a presentation just around the budget and also provide some resources and tools, a sample budget sheet that has formulas already included in it just to make it a lot easier for you all. It is optional, but I highly recommend you attend next week for the budget revision webinar, as everyone's required to submit one. So I just want to make sure that it's very clear that during the planning period, these requirements do not apply. So you can use the approved indirect cost rate that your tribe or organization has received at any limit. I mean, as long as it was approved already. So, you know, if you have a 30% indirect cost rate, you can use that in the first year, but you will have to reduce it in the years that you are providing services. So in the first year, it's fair game. If you need to use it to set up any of the costs, use it, but please make sure it is limited and reduce in the following years. This chart has a quick breakdown of what's considered a part of that 20% breakdown and what's considered direct services under that required 80% breakdown. So, you know, 80% of the funds during the years that you're providing services must go to students. So, you know, they're the contracted costs for the services. If you're providing services to students, some of those costs can be included as direct services. But anything that is for the student, something that they're selecting would be considered that direct service costs. Under that 20%, there's a lot that needs to be considered, including the selection process, like the constructional costs, how families will select their services. The parent feedback has to be included in there. Again, we'll provide some resources and ways to help get that information at cost efficient prices. And then direct admin costs. So this is, you know, the cost it takes to communicate with me as the program officer, the time it takes to produce the APR report, any costs and overseeing the actual services. Indirect cost is included in the 20%. And, you know, things such as if you want to hire an evaluator, that will be included in 20%. The travel to DC, when we are able to travel, hopefully we are able to travel in the near future, but that will also need to be included in the 20%. So just be mindful when you are revising your budget, the difference between those costs and what's considered direct services. Honestly, if it's not something the students selecting are a part of the selection process, you know, the selection that they're making, it will be, you know, considered direct services. So we will go into a lot further detail next week. Please join that webinar. It will be all around budgets. And, you know, we have the due date of November 18th. So it's a little bit less than a month away. So, you can start planning now and maybe fine tune next week. If you are completely understanding what we need from the budget revision, you can submit it before November 18th, but I would still highly recommend joining us next week just to make sure we're all on the same page. Next slide. So in the future, after November 18th, you can submit a budget revision at any time throughout the year. Things happen. You might, again, have a new service provider, or services that cost more or less. There might be personnel changes, contract changes, things like that, that you will need to submit a budget revision. Again, we'll provide some resources to help submit budget revisions, like optional and sample budget worksheets. But you can submit the budget revision at any time besides in September, the last month of the fiscal year, because we are super busy and we will not get to it. And we probably already made budget decisions for your award. So please, submit it as needed. And this is the list of, I mentioned briefly before, not everything requires approval or an actual official budget revision. But if there's changing in the personnel line item, any key personnel on the staff, if it's changing in any contracts, if it's any equipment purchases, equipment's considered anything $5,000 or more. If you're changing the travel line item, you need to make sure that you are getting approval from myself. And to do that, it's fairly simple. You will submit it through email. Everyone should have my email by now, but if you don't, it's in this presentation, including your PR number in the subject, and then you can just state, budget modification or revision, and provide justification. Please make sure that you are including the project objective or goal in your application that relates to the budget revision. It makes it a lot easier to approve because that's what we have to ensure, you're still staying on the same scope as your original application. So please make sure you're making that connection in the justification and a line item budget as well, showing where the changes are moving from. But again, we will cover this in a lot more detail in the near future. Next slide. So again, the budget workshop is next week, October 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. It will be a lot of the same presenters today. I highly recommend attending. We know this is very complex and, there's probably several indirect cost rate questions and admin costs questions that we are happy to address. But we know we just don't have enough time today. Next slide. So something I really, really love in a way to stay connected with all the grantees are our monthly talking stick sessions for any of the project directors who have NYCP grants. They know how impactful the monthly talking stick sessions are. We are very short staff at OIE. Hopefully we do expand in the future. But this is one way where we can just stay on the same page and address all of the questions or, reminders and deadlines that's needed for the directors. The session will be the second Thursday of every month. We will invite NYCP project directors as well too, and there will be breakout sessions as well. Some things won't be confusing, but there are some general information that we can address together and then do some breakout sessions. Again, I will be the program officer for all of the ACE awardees, the ACE team, and any NYCP grants that have an ACE grant as well. So if you are a project director for an NYCP grant, please let me know, because we've noticed that we've missed a couple, but because there may be different names that's used for organizations, but the same project director. But I will be keeping those NYCP grants and directors just for now, so we'll all be on the same monthly call. Some months we might spotlight grantees and have grantees present, and you guys are the experts, you're in the field, and a lot of the tips and how to get things done. I learn a lot from you guys as well. I love seeing the progress that's done. This job is very meaningful to me, so I'm here to support you completely. I know you guys are doing a lot of the hard work, and I'm just your team member in DC. So please feel free, to reach out and ask questions. Again, we will be addressing a lot of information in our monthly talking stick sessions. But if you do have any other questions, please email me. Email is definitely the best way to communicate with me. Make sure you are including the PR number. One, because I want to make sure that we're talking about the right grant. Some grantees receive multiple awards under the same year, or, you might have an NYCP grant. So just make sure, you're emailing me. We are a very small staff. So if I'm not replying back, within a couple of days or a week, please email me again. Sometimes I look at it and put on a note, but it's definitely helpful, if it's something like a budget revision or something urgent that you really need in a timely manner and I haven't replied, please send me multiple emails. That does not bother me at all. I just get hundreds of emails each day, so sometimes I can lose track of something. And hopefully, things get better once we get more staff. But I am here for you. I'm just one person. So, please, if you have any questions, send them to me, and send them twice if you didn't get an answer the first time. Next slide. Questions. Are there any questions?
So there were a couple of questions about budget pieces. So one was they thought the 20% was inclusive toward the 20% of admin cost and 80% direct services. Their GAN did not list an attachment 4. I believe they're referencing the 20% indirect cost rate. They thought that was part of the administrative costs.
I'm trying to see the question, sorry.
Yeah.
So I thought the 20% was inclusive. So attachment 4 on your GAN would be for indirect cost. If we are missing an indirect cost rate, we would have included attachment 4, or if it was expired or expired on 9/30, then we would have requested attachment 4. But yes, the indirect cost rate would need to be included within that 20%, along with other things as well. Like I mentioned, the service selection method, the parent involvement feedback, travel to DC, the time it takes to complete the APR. So maybe all of that is considered indirect cost rate. But again, you do not have to apply your full amount of indirect cost rate. You can reduce it to a lower amount. We do know that some tribes have very large indirect cost rates, but unfortunately, one of the key components of this priority is making sure that 80% of those funds in the service years are going to students.
And I think that did answer her question, because she put in another comment saying, yeah, that her rate was 6.5% and she included it in that 20%. So that is correct. The other
Yeah.
question was about the 20% indirect cost rate and whether that was solely during the planning period or throughout the entire grant.
So during the planning period, you can apply your approved indirect cost rate, whatever was approved. So you're not limited to any percentage. If you have a 43% indirect cost rate, you can apply 43% in your planning period, but you would definitely have to reduce it once you start providing services. So during the planning period, you're able to use, there's no restrictions or limitations on budget in the planning period. Besides, during the planning period, you cannot provide services. So this is all, pre-service planning, getting contracts and systems together, making sure that you have the correct staff hired, and able to start on that date that you provided in your application.
And I think the only other questions were a couple regarding the due date for the budget revision not being in the GAN. So just re-emphasizing they are due November 18th for everyone. And then about the budget revision workshop invite, we will be sending those out after the event today. We didn't want to send it out and you not know what in the world the invitation was to. So that will come from that same oie@seiservices.com. And if there are additional fiscal or budget staff that you'd like to have attend that might be helping you with your budget revision, you can send an email to oie@seiservices.com and we can send out invites to those additional staff as well. And then we'll also be sending out the invites to those talking stick sessions today. And then 2 new questions just popped up.
So that's correct. For your first question, the budget revision due date is not included in the GAN. We wanted to make sure that we provided enough resources and time. And of course, we didn't know the future or when we were able to provide these webinars. So, we're giving you a month, which we think is a good amount of time to revise your budget. And, we will again have another webinar next week. And that is for everyone. Everyone is required to submit a new budget revision. It should be included in your GAN. There was not an attachment for that change unless you received a reduction, but everyone will be required to submit a new budget on November 8th.
And we had a couple of other budget questions. I'm going to suggest, in the interest of time, because we're getting close to the end, that we go ahead and finish up the last couple of slides, and then we can come back to those.
Yeah, we can, we'll have a lot of information covered next week for budget. So, let's keep our questions for non-budget related questions, but we just have a couple more resource slides we can get through. And this right here is the contact for any indirect costs questions that you may have. Andre, his number and email provided. Next slide. And here's, FAQs, a link for FAQs about ACE. This was from the pre-application webinars. So there's a lot of FAQs there. I highly recommend going through and reading that, as well as the notice inviting application and the program regs as well. So these are very useful links to help, guide your program. Next question. Next slide. And thank you, Haishka and Lummi Language. My email is provided as well as Donna's. You'll be hearing a lot from me. We have, about 5 years to go together. So we're the first ACE team, the first cohort. I'm really excited to finally kick this off. It took a lot of blood, sweat, tears to get this competition out, but it means a lot. I'm so happy that we were able to award a large amount. I know you guys will do great things. I'm super excited to get this started. And again, my email is provided. If there's any other questions or concerns, we know that there were a lot of specific questions about GANs and budget revisions. Again, please email me, include your PR number in your subject line item, and we can get some of those specific questions addressed. We hope that this was informative, and I really hope that you guys join us next week, as well as our monthly talking stick sessions. Again, Haishka.
I'm going to leave this slide up for just a second in case anyone's trying to get down your email, and then I'll also pop it in the chat box.
Bianca.
Yes.
Hey, this is Kelly Brain with Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I kind of lost you there at the end. Can I just ask you a couple of questions real quick, or do I need to email you?
Is it program specific or budget related? Budget could be for next week, and program specific can be email. But if it was any general,
Well, I didn't know if you had answered. I'd sent a question. I tried to pull it back up, but it was gone. Where would I find that on my GAN real quick about that budget, about needing to submit that by November 18th?
Oh yeah, so on the GAN, it's the best thing to do is kind of look right after the signature. Let me pull up one.
As I have gone through and I have highlighted, I've read everything, and I had highlighted everything that had a due date. Because I know that the budget was kind of a challenge for us. And in fact, we created 2 budgets. We created one that was just for the planning period. And then we did one that was the 80%, starting in after the planning period, because we did a 9-month. I'm just not finding November 18th anywhere.
Look at the 10. So if you look at box 10,
Okay.
you pick your PR number and information, and then it will say the terms and conditions of the grant. So these are all the conditions that will be attached.
Yes, and I've read through all of this.
So which one are you looking for?
Well, I'm looking for where it says due date November 18th, budget revision.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we didn't have the budget revision date in there. It's just number 2 for the budget revision needed. So since there was a date in there, that we provided, a month's length from basically now, or
okay. And my number 2 says it's basically OMB requires federal agencies to assign this is about the federal award identifying number. That's what, because I have a 1 and I have a 2. And that's what it states on number 2.
We may need to address this offline because I know the time is up, and just to be cognizant of everybody, if you don't mind, we can take a look. We want to make sure if the information's correct.
I have the same information.
I'm sorry. So I think a lot of the numbers are mixed up on the GANs, and that's what we noticed today as well. So, if anything in box 10, please read thoroughly to make sure if there's anything that's still needed. But we recognize that there were not dates included for some of the information. So that's why we provided, this is the first time that we presented the November 18th date for the revision today.
And we will be sending the slides out after the event today so that you can go through those grant conditions. So if there are, little changes in the numbering, you can still match up the content of each grant condition there on the slide. All right, well, we are right at time. So if you have any further questions, feel free to pop those in the chat box and we can follow up with you, as well as if there are budgetary questions, cover those in next week's budget revision workshop on the 29th. If you have grant specific questions, feel free to reach out to Bianca. Again, her email is in the chat box. And then we will be seeing everyone next week. Thank you.